Welcome back, my fellow dabbers. As we dive deeper down the rabbit hole that is dabbing and all the accessories that come with it, today we are talking about something that's not really a must-have, but definitely a nice addition to use in the world of dabbing, and that is pearls and pillars. Before we get started on all the different kinds and shapes and sizes and this, that, and the other thing about pearls and pillars, this is another one of those situations where I get asked a lot, what is the best? And unfortunately, again, no answer for what's the best, because this is one of those things that's really going to be highly dependent on what kind of banger you have, what style of banger you have, how big it is on the interior dimensions, and what kind of rig you have, and how much airflow your rig does or doesn't have. This is just going to take some sciencing, and that's why you see so many pearls and pillars in front of you. I went on a little bit of a shopping spree with D-Nail, who not only has great customer service, but also has a lot of different options for pearls and pillars. And while we're talking a little bit about D-Nail, I am really excited for one of their product releases coming this year, the Universal Banger Heater, which is just going to take this dabbing experience to the next level. Let's start off with the easy topic of pearls. With pearls, the main thing you're going to encounter are size, which typically come in a range from 2 millimeters all the way up to 8 millimeters, and sometimes even a little more than that. Material, which tends to be quartz, ruby, moissanite, sick, or opal, and then shape. And the shapes of pearls tend to be mostly round, sometimes square, or even egg-shaped. But for the most part, when people talk about pearls, we're talking about just round little spheres. Let's get started. So just a quick little bit about pearls. A bigger pearl will push through more material, but need more airflow. And a smaller pearl is better for smaller dabs. It will need less airflow to get moving, but will have a harder time pushing through a lot of material. So here we are with just some standard quartz pearls. And to show you the size, we're going from 3 millimeter, 4 millimeter, 5 millimeter, and 6 millimeter here. So you can see there's quite a big jump from the 3 to the 4, and quite a huge jump from the 4 to the 6. So how do you know what size to use? That's going to depend on a couple different things. One, how big the interior of your banger is. With a typical bucket banger like this, you have the biggest range and can use any size. I've even seen people put a 10 millimeter pearl in one of these. And the only thing to take note of when you put big pearls in your banger, it's going to need more airflow, or you're going to have to inhale harder to get that pearl going. So if you have a really restrictive cap or piece and you put a big pearl in there, and then on top of that you put a lot of material in there, it's going to take a lot of air power to get that pearl moving. And same can be said for one of the smaller pearls. That if you take a small pearl and put it inside, and then put a lot of material inside, the small pearl is going to have a hard time pushing through all of the material to stir it inside the banger. So there's a little bit of a balance between how big of a pearl you get, how big of a dab you're going to take, and how much airflow your banger, carb cap, and rig have. So that's one of the easy things I liked with D-Nail, is they had a little mix bag grab pack that had a few pearls of each size to really just do some sciencing and figure out what pearl sizes work best in what banger and with what rig, depending if I'm using my RBR with a glob stopper or if I'm using my Vortex with my Evil Empire. It really matters what banger and what rig you're using to match up the right tool. Now that we've covered size, next up let's talk about material. What that is just what the pearl is made out of. The most standard pearl that people use are these red ones that are just lab-made rubies. Nothing very special here. They have good thermal properties, good heat retention, and they are very similar to the properties of quartz, so they work really well. They're also fairly resistant to thermal shock. If they're that similar to quartz, then at that point, I think I'd much rather just use one of these quartz pearls. Especially because it's, depending on where you get your ruby pearls from, there can be a bunch of different qualities. Same with quartz. And one of the biggest things to take into consideration with the quality is how hard the outside of the surface is. And that's why I like these quartz spheres from D-Nail, which they call their Optech line, because they're polished and have a really smooth outside that's not porous and has a less chance of getting chazzed. So now that we have ruby and quartz, some of the other materials we have are ZrO2 and SiC. SiC is silicon carbide, and that is a commonly used material in the dabbing world. I like using these when I use my B2 because the bucket is made of SiC already, so it kind of just makes sense to match thermal properties to the heater that you're using. Then we have the ZrO2, which is good, but lacks in the heat retention department. So good for flavor, but if you're trying to use it as a thermal battery, it wasn't really my favorite. Then, last up in materials, we have opals. Opals are another material that's very similar to the thermal properties of borosilicate glass, which is what a lot of your rigs are made out of. These are really fun because they're pretty, but they are susceptible to thermal shock. So, like one of these that I got from Taco Dabs, which is an opal encased in glass, or just one of these, which is a straight up opal from Dopal's Opals, or this really fun square one I got from D-Nail. That leads us into our next one of shape, where a round pearl like this will zoom around really evenly and spin in the banger really fast. Something that you can experiment with shape, and a square one like this, especially when coupled with multiples, is these pop more like popcorn instead of spinning around in the banger. What you got to do is just try some, see what looks interesting to you, and it's just about doing some science. So before this runs too long, let's go ahead and pop one of these pearls in a banger, and let's take a dab before we move on to our part 2 video, pillars. So now that we've talked about pearls, we got some pearls in the blender here, and I'm going to use the square ones just because the round ones are so common. They spin around in a circle, it's real fun, but these are a little different, so I'll show you how these function in here. So let's go ahead, heat this up, and take a dab. For it to cool down, I usually like to go in around 510 with this setup. Let's hit it. Alright, well that was a great dab, and I really have fun with those square pearls. Well, my banger is now down at temp to dunk, so I'm going to go ahead and clean this, and as always, thanks for watching, and stay lifted. Psst, come hang out with us on Discord.